Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Michelle Witte. I am here with John Kiriakou, and we are talking a little bit about Cuba. We're talking about Cuba. I have to talk about Havana Syndrome and the black hole that has been sucked into.
Oh, yeah.
And immigration and what all of these factors have to do with the U.S. relationship with Cuba. Joining us for this conversation is Arnold August. He's a journalist based in Montreal. He's an author. He contributes to the Canada Files. He contributes to Press TV. He's on the. He's a member of the Black Alliance for Peace Solidarity Network. Arnold, thanks for joining us. Perhaps our guest. We dropped him. All right, we'll have to pick him back up. That gives me a minute to. Well, you know what, John? I'm going to start with you because the U.S. Embassy in Havana has been basically closed. It hasn't been, providing visas or any consular services since 2017.
Outrageous.
And that is when we all first heard about Havana Syndrome. It is now opened. It's going to start processing immigrant visas, et cetera, et cetera. But even NPR, when they were talking about this morning, you could tell even they were a little bit sheepish about the fact that there has been no resolution to Havana Syndrome. None. One of the NPR talking heads this morning, they didn't describe it at all. You know, it's just glossed over as a mysterious health conditions. Okay, move on. One of them just said that, the name sounds very mysterious. Yeah.
Oh, how ridiculous.
Yeah, it sounds like it's from maybe a mystery novel or something, or a work of fiction. Anyway, so, I want to stop and talk a little bit about what happened 5 years ago that made us close this embassy and all freak out about magic Russian energy weapons and pass a bill making sure some of the already most privileged people in our society have access to better health care and more money.
Right.
And so, what happened to Havana Syndrome? I guess the bad guys just stopped doing it. We're all supposed to forget.
I thought it was crickets.
Well, yeah, but of course it wasn't crickets because it wasn't you know what I mean? Maybe it was crickets. It's as plausible, more plausible than the, mysterious energy weapons. But it's so if you were a Havana Syndrome believer, which is apparently, tail to toe or whatever, head to toe of the federal government.
Yep.
We all believe that some adversary has mystery weapons that can make us terribly,
that's right,
or not so terribly, sick from a distance.
Right.
Oh, well, I guess they just stopped doing it when we figured it out. I mean, how should people feel about this?
Yeah,
about the fact that Havana Syndrome has just been brushed under the rug?
I've got a theory, and I really do believe in my own theory here. I believe that there are some people who are unusually sensitive to the myriad of waves that are in the air at any given time, right? Whether it's, radio waves or 5G or whatever, that it's not this mysterious bioweapon that's been developed by the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians or the Cubans or the Israelis or whomever.
Yeah.
Or by DARPA, for that matter. I think there are some people that are just sensitive to all the garbage that's in the air.
Yeah.
And they suffer from it.
Yep.
There's a county in Western Virginia, Highland County, that purposely doesn't have any of this stuff. That's because that's where the military has these enormous dishes pointed up to space to listen for, alien signals and life and stuff.
Yeah.
There's no cable TV. There are no cell phone towers. There's nothing. It's like, I've been there. Friends of mine have a farm there. I went for the weekend. I thought I was going to, commit suicide because there's nothing to do except walk around.
Farmland, observe
that's not all it's cracked up to be.
Dig a hole, marvel at what lies beneath the surface of the soil.
But the Washington Post magazine did an article about Highland County, Virginia, saying that people who suffer from these sensitivities to radio waves have moved to Highland County and their symptoms go away.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something to this.
I think the people who were disputing the idea that Havana Syndrome was the result of some kind of attack, we're not disputing that people were experiencing symptoms.
No, there's medical evidence that they've gotten traumatic brain injuries and nausea.
Some of them had a tummy ache, whatever.
Exactly.
I'm not going to tell you didn't have a tummy ache, but I am going to tell you it wasn't the result of a mystery weapon that we have also just decided that we're not that concerned about anymore. Arnold August, I know we have you on the line. I want to get into Cuba specifically, but do you want to talk about how do you think people should feel about Havana Syndrome apparently being sort of consigned to the dustbin of history?
Well, I think what both of you said are right. I mean, I think the American people, and if I may add, the Canadian people, because the Justin Trudeau government followed the Trump administration and also imposed sort of sanctions against their consular services in Havana. So I guess we could say people in North America have to wake up to the fact that whole thing, the syndrome, was a farce that was worked out, I don't know who, but definitely in the interest of the Trump administration, who had promised that he will stand up to the dictators in Venezuela and Cuba and all that, and not follow what he calls a Democratic Party opening up to Cuba. So it came. The initial sanctions came in the very month when Trump started his mandate back in January 2017, I believe. So, the question is, people can ask, why should Cuba, who has been trying since 1959 to have better relations, good relations with Cuba, definitely wanted the blockade lifted? Why should the Cubans get into a serious contradiction with the United States by trying to disorient their staff or somehow poison their minds and all? Just that alone, it does not make sense. Cuba never had an interest and does not have an interest in doing that. Now, so I think we have to say that, all those who've been saying since 2017 that there was an issue, they owe it, including the high-level so-called scientists. They owe it to the public opinion in North America to explain, well, as you said, what happened. If they're opening the consular services now, that means are we to assume that whole thing, as many people have correctly said, that it is made up or exaggerated by the United States and some so-called scientific think tanks. They owe us an explanation.
All right, let's talk about migration, because that's what really this is probably all about.
Yes.
This is, according to reports, this is the biggest migratory flight from Cuba in decades. I am pretty sure the morning podcast on NPR said it's possible up to 2% of the island's population has left. A lot of Cubans are trying to come to the United States. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, Cubans are the second largest nationality after Mexicans attempting to cross the border. NPR tells us the growing migration is due to a complex array of factors, including economic, energy, and political crises. And it only alludes to the U.S. relationship with Cuba as being historically tense. That's their phrasing for the entire 7 decades. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Arnold, if you could talk to us a little bit about, this flight from Cuba and some of the crises driving it, and whether NPR should have maybe explained a little bit more about the U.S. relationship with Cuba in order to explain those factors.
Yeah, that's very good. Historically, they mentioned historically been the case between Cuba and the United States. In fact, everyone knows in 1960, Mallory, or 61, Secretary of State Mallory said that we have to impose sanctions against Cuba to make the economy scream, and make sure that people in Cuba are deprived of all basic necessities, become poor, but blame that on the Cuban government. Now, with regards to how this whole thing affects migration at this time, like many people say, well, the American blockade against Cuba does not work. Well, I'm sorry to say, but it does work to a large extent. Mm-hmm. When we just look at migration, of course, it has not worked by overthrowing the government. We have that straight. But it has worked in contributing substantially to the economic degradation that Cuban people have been going through all of these years. And part of this sharp decline in economic possibilities, despite the advances they made before, is that there is an increase in immigration. Before this current wave, and now in the last few months, even before that, there was regular immigration from Cuba to the United States. And I'm in contact, with my Cuban friends. I've lived there for quite some time. And this creates major frustrations among a very important section of the Cuban population. Many families, who have at least one person sort of exiled in the United States. And this, it tears away from the morale, from the happiness that Cuban people would normally be able to enjoy in their society. So it does eat away from the moral fabric of the Cuban society. And the latest, I think NPR said, and correctly so, this latest wave of immigration is last month, I believe, was more than Cuba experienced for decades, or the whole year previous. So it's very serious. I mean, the Cubans, we talk about a social society. One of the main features of social society is being happy, right? You're happy in life. Mm-hmm. But no one can deny this immigration caused by the United States takes away a certain important portion of this happiness. So it does. The blockade does affect the Cuban society.
Yeah. Is the Cuban government attempting to do anything about migration specifically?
In fact, there is. I just came across an article that was just published today, an interesting article in which an American specialist, William Legrand, he said that there is, firstly, Biden himself has just nominated Christopher Dodd to be his special emissary to Latin America and specifically to Cuba. Mm-hmm. So the discussion behind the scenes, apparently, according to this new report that just surfaced yesterday, there is some discussion, behind the scenes discussion between Cuba and the United States that includes all major issues, including immigration. Now, what is interesting, and I find a bit dangerous, that discussion has even gone so far as to possibly that Cuba should entertain or consider releasing some of those people who were arrested following the July 21st uprising or protests or whatever last year. Now, if Cuba is going to consider releasing some of these people who were tried and convicted for rioting and carrying out violent activities against the state, well, I don't think Cuba will do it. The fact that it's being considered in the discussion, in my view, I think that's a major mistake, because if Cuba gave up that right to try and convict people who violated the Cuban Constitution, if they let them go or in any way reduce their sentence substantially, this would increase those people who want to pursue this type of color revolution or regime change in Cuba. Like, if we could carry on, the consequences are not that bad. We won't go to jail. But I'm not saying the Cubans are going to do that, but it's interesting for us to take note that there are discussions going on right now. And I know Cuba is very desperate to resolve the problem of immigration for the reasons I just suggested. Yeah. And I think the United States also wants to reduce immigration because it's playing havoc.
Well, yeah.
The current administration of all these people coming into the United States.
This is something that I think is interesting because, I think that, other reports note that migration is actually putting pressure on the United States to open more dialogue with Cuba, because Joe Biden has not found a way to reduce immigration other than by falling back on, tactics to more effectively expel migrants. He hasn't been able to put through any kind of immigration reform. I think you could argue that he hasn't tried very hard. And now with Cubans being such a significant percentage of the number of migrants, you know, it would seem like improving relations with the island. And I mean, I think it's probably too early to hope for any kind of end to an embargo, but it does seem like, yeah, immigration could actually pressure the United States to come to the table and talk to Cuba and make some concessions. I wanted to ask you about that.
I think you're right. You know, this immigration from Cuba to the United States is building up to such a proportion that before we heard about people from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Central America, and Haiti. But now Cuba is one of the most important sources of illegal immigration from different parts of Latin America, for example, Mexico, into Cuba, and all of those illegal small ships, small vessels going from Havana to Miami. So this is something that Biden does not want. I think, is it worth it? I mean, normally the United States, as you know, they like to welcome refugees from a country such as Cuba to maintain or their basic narrative. Look, communism does not work. Socialism does not work. Look at all the people coming to this nice capitalist country in the United States to fight freedom. Yes, that is an advantage for the Biden administration, as it has been for all previous administrations. But the fact is, I think Biden must be weighing the possibility that this very small portion of the Cuban population going to the United States are going to just go overboard to log the United States and put down the Cuban government. This really an important point for Biden, to the extent of allowing more and more of these Cuban immigrants to come to the United States? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that the political positive blowback for the United States of, socialism is failing, capitalism is working. I don't think that they are really, I don't think they think that this is going to become the main outcome of this current increase. It would rather be the main outcome would be to destabilize part of the United States, especially in Florida and along the border with Mexico, which Biden does not want to do.
Yeah. I wanted to ask also, what do Cubans need, right? There was a terrible disaster, right? I mean, I think the energy crisis they're alluding to is a result of that huge fire that there was at a refinery that other countries sent more help for. So what do Cubans actually need in the immediate moment?
Good question.
To be quite frank, I speak to my, I haven't been able to go there lately, but I speak to my Cuban colleagues pretty often. I mean, several days a week, and their main overall concern is very clear. Is the inflation is rampant there. Like, okay, like yesterday I went to buy rice for this. Today it's 200% higher. There is a very important increase in price of basic commodities, that is mainly of food, and also they are still deprived of electricity for several hours a day, 7 days a week, as a result of that Matanzas fire that you just mentioned. So, Cubans want to be able to buy food and have electricity as much as possible during the daytime. This is the main feature. And, even though, of course, they all blame the United States, the long-lasting blockade in creating the situation, and then you had the pandemic, the loss of massive tourist funds coming as a result of tourism to Cuba, also was lost for almost a whole year during the pandemic. So this whole, poisonous atmosphere of accumulating blockade affects the Matanzas fire, the closing down of tourist industry for a couple of years and all that. All this is sort of creating a situation where the economic situation, as my friend said, it's untenable. It's very, very bad. Now, what can the Cubans do to stop this rapid inflation? Well, there's also a problem, and the Cubans recognize it, of corruption.
Yeah.
You have people like professional, what they call colejeros, professional people who go into these long lines up for food, right?
Yeah.
So there are people who go there. They take a spot there. Someone has to pay them. They stay in that spot to get the food they want to buy, while the other person who can go back to their family. And there's also, and this is recognized by Diaz-Canel in a speech only about a week ago, that there's a major problem of people who on a black market that buy material, especially food, and then resell it at a much higher price. So there, I don't want to be pessimistic, but let us face the fact, as friends of the Cuban Revolution, as I am, that there's a very serious situation in terms of economy, in terms of corruption, and how they will deal with it at this time, I don't know. It is very difficult.
Yeah. Arnold August, thank you so much for joining us. That was journalist and author Arnold August. Do you want to tell our listeners where they can go to find your more recent work?
Yeah, just go to my website. It's www.arnoldaugust.com. Simple.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.